Well, we knew it was going to happen eventually, but New Orleans Saints second round selection Isaiah Foskey has officially signed his contract. What took so long? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big thank you to all the everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can always subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And if you want to keep the conversation going one-on-one with me, join in on our exclusive film studies, inside information, especially with camp about to kick off just next week, as well as exclusive Q&As, you can head over today at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints, a community I would love for you to join. I, as always, am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media. You can find me as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site, covering the New Orleans Saints every Tuesday on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at some of the camp battles on either side of the line. Defensive interior, of course, has a big one. We'll get to that. Will Bryan Bresee start week one? We're also going to take a look at the offensive line and some of the challenges that could potentially happen there. But I want to start off with the news of, what day was it? Thursday or Wednesday for our Thursday episode here. Isaiah Foskey, the New Orleans Saints second round selection, defensive end out of Notre Dame, has officially signed his contract. And this is basically what we expected. So what is it that took so long? Absolutely nothing to be concerned about as we kind of set up as we were going through the offseason and everything. Look, these second round contracts just take longer and longer because the NFL is changing in terms of how many selections down the draft selection do you get. 4 years of fully guaranteed money, 3 years of guaranteed money, how much guaranteed money you get in a fourth year, as well as offset language. So just to reintroduce everybody to offset language a lot of times means that if you get signed to a 4-year deal, but the team, let's say, cuts you 3 years into your deal, and then you have, let's say, $2 million left in your fourth year, and then you sign with another team for $4 million. Does the $2 million that you currently have for the team that drafted you count as a part of that $2 million? Does that travel with you, or do you get paid that $2 million in addition to the new $4 million from the new team? This is what offset language is all about. So sometimes it either includes the offset, sometimes it doesn't include the offset, and so that's a lot of the conversation there. The other thing is the guarantees, right? Like we kind of previewed this a little bit. I would say often, but maybe not often enough, but certainly to discuss it. That 2 selections before Isaiah Foskey was the Atlanta Falcons selection of offensive lineman Matthew Bergeron, and Matthew Bergeron signed his contract a month, maybe not a month ago, but a few weeks ago. And in his contract, he got a fully guaranteed first year, fully guaranteed second year, which is usual for second round picks. But now we're seeing more and more second round selections get 3rd years fully guaranteed. And so what we saw with Matthew Bergeron's contract, who was selected at pick 38, 2 picks before Isaiah Foskey, is that he got year 1 guaranteed, year 2 guaranteed, year 3 guaranteed, and then like $10,000 of year 4 guaranteed. So what we then knew about Isaiah Foskey's contract is that, okay, that kind of gives you the structure of what the guarantees are going to look like. Because usually if you're a first round pick, your entire 4 years are guaranteed. You get the 5th year option, all the other stuff. And the NFL is kind of shifting a little bit to where further and further down, 38 picks, 40 picks, 37 picks, whatever down, you start to see finally the 4th year fall off of that guarantee structure. And that's sort of what we saw this year at Matthew Bergeron's contract at pick 34. So that kind of, or pick 38. So that kind of answered the big question about Isaiah Foskey at 40. Will he get a fully guaranteed 4th year? No, he very likely won't. Will he get some money guaranteed at his 4th year? Certainly not more than $10,000 or whatever Matthew Bergeron got his 4th year. But he could still potentially see some guaranteed money there. But the bottom line is that they got all that stuff taken care of. Then they needed Isaiah Foskey to finish by, he's got to be the one to sign the contract, right? And why cut into his offseason break between mini camps and training camp when you know he was there throughout all of OTAs, he was there throughout all the mini camps, he's going to be there to start training camp, no one's worried about this, so let's just wait for him to show up in New Orleans, and then literally the second day that he was in New Orleans, pen the paper, he signs the contract, and he's there. This is the same thing that happened with Alontae Taylor, the New Orleans Saints second-round selection cornerback out of Tennessee last year, where he was, the rookies reported, I believe, last year it was on the 19th, and then he signed the contract on the 20th. This year, the rookies reported on the 18th, and Isaiah Foskey signed his contract on the 19th. So next year, when the rookies report on the 17th or whatever it's going to be, if there's a second-round pick that hasn't signed his contract, which I will tell you now, depending upon how and where the New Orleans Saints select in the second round, is very possible. There are still several second-round picks that are still signing contracts right now. They're probably not going to sign the contract until they show up for training camp. And so what I want to highlight is we've seen this with Alontae Taylor now. We've seen it with Isaiah Foskey now. So next year, if it happens again, don't worry about it. It's all Gucci. It's all fine. This isn't a bad situation or anything like that. It's just a situation in which it's just how the cookie crumbles when it comes down to these contracts, the contract negotiations, offset language, guarantees, all the other stuff that kind of molds or ends up hitting the negotiating table. And then when you need somebody to sign the contract, you need them there personally, you need them there in person. And so you just wait till they're around and then they sign the contract and then it's all Gucci. The reason why I was never worried about Isaiah Foskey's contract was the same reason why I was never worried about Alontae Taylor's contract. When we were out there for OTAs, so was Isaiah Foskey. When we were out there I wasn't out there for minicamps, but when everyone was out there during minicamps, so was Isaiah Foskey. I knew that when we go out there next week, and I'm so happy I get to say next week training camp starts, we knew that Isaiah Foskey was going to be out there, and we had a feeling that it was going to be after he had signed his deal, and that's exactly what happened. So it's just a weird thing. But the good news for New Orleans, it's not a weird thing. I'm sorry. Let me tone my language back a little bit. It's something that we're all kind of getting used to, and it's an ever-changing part of the NFL landscape when it comes to rookies. That's probably a more articulate example or anecdote for what it is, right? The good news is that with Isaiah Foskey now having signed the contract, of course he's under contract, but also the entire rookie class is now signed, all the way from Bryan Bresee to Alontae to A.T. Perry. Everybody's signed. The rookies are all signed. Everything's good. You've probably heard, if you didn't listen to yesterday's episode, that guys like A.T. Perry, Nick Saldiveri, Kendre Miller, and others were placed on preseason injury lists, like non-football injury lists, as well as physically unable to perform lists. If you want to hear the breakdown and whether you should sound or quiet the alarm on that, just jump back over to yesterday's episode, broke all that down for you. But the rookies are all signed. Everybody's under contract. The rookies have all reported. It sounds like everyone was there. Remember, even those guys on the NFI list and the PUP list are able to be there for film, and they're able to be there in sort of the classroom environments. They're able to be there for conditioning drills. They just can't practice is really all. And so it's all good news for the New Orleans Saints. And then we, media, will be out there the day after rookies report on the 25th. So the rookies report, veterans report. Veterans report on the 25th. We will all be out there on the 26th, and then you'll start getting practice notes and stuff like that. And by the way, we're getting back to two-a-days on the 24th. So starting Monday, we're back to two-a-days. Show drops, pre-recorded show drops in the morning. We'll do a live show in the evening. Get some questions that I'll use for the morning show on Tuesday. Then we'll just keep doing just like we did last year. So very excited to get all that underway, but just wanted to provide the update. Isaiah Foskey, just like we thought, no need to worry about it. Under contract, all's good. Coming up next, along with Isaiah Foskey, first round selection Bryan Bresee has the chance to maybe impact immediately as a rookie. Is he going to start Week 1? We're going to discuss the interior defensive line camp battle next before we get to the interior offensive line, which is very interesting as well. Got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy advice you're going to get every single week all season long. We're going to be providing you, whether you're prepping for your draft or you're looking to scout the waiver wire, with the best players that are the guaranteed fit for your roster. So with draft prep underway for this upcoming season, let's see who Vinny Iyer has picked for this week's eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy picks of the week. So if you're looking to make a smooth turn in your fantasy football snake drafts with the last pick in the first round, but the first pick in the second round, why not make sure that you get that guaranteed fit with a winning 1-2 punch of workhorse power in your backfield by taking Colts running back Jonathan Taylor as well as Cleveland Browns running back Nick Chubb back to back. While Taylor is the perfect rebound candidate and it should be a run-friendly offense overall in Indianapolis, Chubb is set to dominate in more of a combined workload in Cleveland. Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows that a championship team is all about each player being the perfect fit, and the same goes for your vehicle. With eBay's guaranteed fit and over 122 million parts and accessories available at your fingertips, you can make sure that your ride is running smoothly, whether you need air filters, brakes, batteries, tail lights, struts, alternators, shocks, whatever it is that you need, eBay Motors has. You can make sure that you get the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating when your car just needs a little fixing up, because now you'll know exactly how to be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything that your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For all the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. That's all you need. Get the right parts, the right fit, all at the right price over at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Big thank you once again to all the everydayers out there making us your first listen of the day every day. Hey, there's a good chance that Bryan Bresee is not the starter on the interior defensive line week 1, but it doesn't mean that he won't have an impact. But he has every opportunity to change that beginning. Well, technically it's already begun, but really beginning in earnest next week when training camp kicks off. So when it comes to the New Orleans Saints defensive interior, there are a few names to know, and there are a few names that you already know. Of course, the big free agency acquisitions of Colin Saunders, who's a former Kansas City Chief, a guy that I absolutely loved his game coming into the NFL. He's a little bit more of maybe a guy that body-wise is a run plugger, but he's got really good feet. He could be disruptive in the pass game, get a little push on the interior offensive line as well. We'll discuss why that specifically is important here in just a moment. They also brought in another free agency addition in Nathan Shepard, a guy they actually had their eyes on last offseason, according to reports. And he's a guy that's a little bit more of a penetrating, attacking, athletic, 3-tech pass rusher. So think about him a little bit more in the David Onyemata mold, while Colin Saunders is a little bit more the Shy Tuttle mold. They also brought back Malcolm Roach, who could do a little bit of everything. He could be very disruptive in the run game. We've seen him show flashes in the pass rusher game, especially during training camp last year. Very excited to see. And I think we don't talk about Malcolm Roach enough, so I'm going to try to do that quite a bit today, just so you know. But Malcolm Roach really is somebody that has a good opportunity to take a big step. Like we talk about a lot of these other guys as breakout candidates. Carl Granderson and Alontae Taylor, if he gets that starting role, DeMarco Jackson and others. Malcolm Roach is a guy that should be highlighted as a potential breakout candidate in 2023 as well, because he really hasn't gotten too many opportunities in this New Orleans Saints defense to be a, let's just call him like a staple point or a cornerstone of the New Orleans Saints defensive line, right? Like he was never really that guy. He was a rotational guy, but now he's got a real opportunity to potentially step into that going into the offseason. They've also brought in a couple of other guys, Jerron Cage, who came in as a UDFA. They brought in Jack Heflin, who is a guy that spent some time in the one of the other leagues, the spring leagues, XFL or AAF or USFL, whatever. And then you also have, of course, Bryan Bresee, who comes in. And the big question around Bryan Bresee is how quickly will he have an impact for the New Orleans Saints? And look, Bryan Bresee is somebody that I think is going to get a healthy amount of snaps week 1 against the Tennessee Titans, especially after going up against what is effectively a weak offensive line. Now the Titans are bringing in some veteran offensive linemen and trying to get some looks at that and everything, mostly tackle, but they're trying to build up that offensive line. They want to be able to run the ball, all that. And I think that's maybe where the struggle could hit for a guy like Bryan Bresee the very first game of the season. Is the Tennessee Titans love to run. They run over 33% of their offense, so over a third of their offense under center. They love to run the football. They're a heavy run team. They now have a 1-2 punch that's really effective. They actually had a 1-2 punch that was pretty effective last year too. But this year in Derrick Henry, as well, of course, the New Orleans area native, Tchoupitoulas native, who's coming in as, Tajay Spears, former Tulane running back. So it's going to be a run-heavy offense for the Tennessee Titans, and that could potentially stand in the way of Bryan Bresee being a starter in 2023's opening game in the Superdome. And the reason why is because he's a very talented pass rusher, but over the course of his collegiate career, the big question marks are, is he going to be able to handle the run game in the NFL? Because we just haven't gotten an opportunity to see that very much from him with injuries and all the other things that he was, of course, dealing with, which are absolutely worth understanding and require understanding in terms of context and everything, 100%. But also, it's just that wasn't his specialty, right? His specialty was always that of being a pass rusher. He was that imposing, sort of destructive, guy that could wreck the middle of the defensive line and get after the quarterback and play 5-tech and bounce out to the outside, rush off the edge, do all these other things as well. He's a pass rusher. He's a born and bred pass rusher. But in order for him to be on the field a lot, he's also got to be able to show what he can do in the run game. So that's what you're really going to be watching for when it comes to Bryan Bresee over the course of training camp. Because I do think that if he can show over the course of training camp that he can be reliable where he needs to be in place, make the plays that he needs to make in the run game, then that's going to increase his opportunities to be out on the field, which is then inherently going to give him more opportunities to make plays, more opportunities to be on for what turns out to be a pass play call and things like that. And then I think during passing situations, obvious passing situations, 3rd and long, 2nd and longer, those types of things, that absolutely you should expect to see Bryan Bresee out on the field. And maybe even in those 3rd down sort of Okie fronts that the Saints like to run with the 3 defensive linemen, the 2 linebackers in the middle, and then the 2 safeties out on the outside, and some collection of those 7 players rush, some collection of those 7 players drop back into coverage. I think I would expect to see Bryan Bresee there. When they were working some of those in-game situations during OTAs, he was the guy in the middle at nose tackle, the one defensive tackle that was on the field in that 3-man front. So I do think you should expect to see that. But the guy that I'm really, really interested in seeing, because if I had to project the starters right now, I would say Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard. They're coming in with a lot of NFL experience and all the other stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of those starters ends up actually being Malcolm Roach. He's very familiar with the system. He is the style of defensive tackle that makes a ton of sense for Todd Grantham. He's a big-bodied guy that moves extremely well, much better at his size than you expected to be able to. Scheme versatile. He can rush the passer, and he can get involved in the run game. He's showing you all those flashes. So I'm really, really interested in a guy like Todd Grantham who creates this attacking mentality for his defensive line. Think to, a guy that I thought the Saints may have potentially drafted in this last draft in Gervon Dexter. Like, that's who he is. He is this big athletic guy that was asked at Florida a lot to be more of a run plugger, but he is incredibly disruptive as a pass rusher. And I feel like if there's somebody on the defensive line, particularly on the interior right now for the New Orleans Saints, that fits that Gervon Dexter build type and sort of unexpected athleticism, underwarranted gift that a guy like that somebody else would have on this defensive line as a pass rusher, despite their run stopping build, it's Malcolm Roach. So I'm really, really curious to see if Malcolm Roach could potentially have that breakout season that we're looking at and looking for along this New Orleans Saints team. Because there's a lot of veteran players. There's a lot of rookies who have already established themselves. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, guys like that. Juwan Johnson, you might call a breakout candidate, but he kind of broke out last year. So there's not really a ton of those breakout guys there. It's a tough one to sort of pinpoint and say, okay, maybe one of these guys returning from injured reserve that didn't play at all last season, Carl Granderson, and then maybe Alontae Taylor. But one would probably argue that if Alontae Taylor won that cornerback 2 spot and he produced at an elite level, he's continuing the elite level that he played at last year because he was outstanding last year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Malcolm Roach and the growth. But what's going to be interesting as well is just kind of see like how and in what situations the Saints are using these defensive linemen over the course of training camp and how they sort of prepare their rotation for the regular season. So we'll be tracking that quite a bit here throughout training camp. So very excited to look at that. And I think that's going to be a very intriguing battle and one that I think can be really fruitful for the New Orleans Saints because they've been pretty stagnant on the interior defensive line since the departure of Malcolm Brown. Not a lot of changes, not a lot of big adjustments there, not a lot of big moves. It's kind of been Carl Granderson and Shai Tuttle and Malcolm Roach, and then a couple of guys that go kind of in and out. Kentavious Street was really nice for them last year. So this is really the first time they've seen a full, what I would call like revolution change at interior defensive line. And I'm really, really excited to see how it works out. Because not only is it the personnel on the field, but it's the coaching, therefore also the mentality that shifts as well. And I know the type of guy that Todd Grantham is and in the attacking that he likes to do with his defensive lines and the mentality he likes to build there. And I think that could be really, really good for this New Orleans Saints defensive line as they're changing over to be a confident, disruptive, attacking defensive line in their changes. Coming up next, I don't have as much optimism on the offensive side of the football when it comes to the offensive line. Let me tell you why, and let me explain to you where the biggest battle might be between three different players on the offensive line. We got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our final camp battle. This is like our 8th one that we've looked at so far. And this is the one that I was really hoping to end on because I wanted the clarification of how quickly are we going to see some of these guys. So I do think that there's a big battle that could potentially happen on the offensive line. There's 2 specific ones that I think we should look at, but one of which outweighs the other. And that's where I want to start off. We'll kind of tagline the other one here in a little bit because it's a little bit less interesting. But the first one that I'm looking at is the offensive guard spot, particularly the one that's held currently by Andrus Peat. I just think that with everything we know about Andrus Peat, with everything we know about the New Orleans Saints and how they don't often like to hide their hands in terms of generating competition, the fact that they traded up to the very, very first selection of day 3 in the 4th round, pick 103 with the Chicago Bears, and they said, we want Nick Saldiveri, the offensive lineman out of Old Dominion, ODU, who can play pretty much anywhere. But the Saints see him as an interior offensive lineman. They have him listed as a guard. They like what he can do on the interior as a guard. So I think that you're watching Andrus Peat battle with Nick Saldiveri, but I also think you're watching James Hurst. I really, really do, especially if Trevor Penning's back healthy, ready to go at the beginning of training camp, which is what we expect to be the case. And if he's back and ready to go, and you have Trevor Penning as your starting left tackle, which is what the team wants for their future, then I think that means that Andrus Peat, Nick Saldiveri, and James Hurst could potentially be battling for the left guard spot. Then I think that there's a chance that one of those guys, Nick Saldiveri or James Hurst, steps into his spot and potentially doesn't give it up, potentially doesn't give it back. Because yes, in the NFL, you do lose your job during injury. It happens. We watched it happen just last year to Jameis Winston, right? And so I don't think that there's a reason. And if that can happen to Jameis Winston, your starting quarterback, I think that could happen to the offensive lineman that just took a pay cut. Like, it just makes sense, right? Like, I don't think that that's too far-fetched. And so I think that if you have what you hope that you're getting in a Nick Saldiveri, the way that they moved up for him when they grabbed him, clearly they thought that he's a guy that shouldn't have made it out of day 2. That's why they went up and got him at the top of day 3. It was literally the first pick of day 3, meaning that every single player that wasn't drafted in rounds 1, 2, or 3 were still on the board. And the New Orleans Saints traded up to 103, the first pick of day 3, because they needed to get Nick Saldiveri. That was their mentality. And I agree I like Nick Saldiveri. I like Nick Saldiveri going in. I knew he would be a guy that was going to be on the Saints' radar. That's why we spent so much time on him. So I do think that there is a realistic chance that a guy like Nick Saldiveri, if he performs well and if he gets healthy, right? He's dealing with the calf injury that happened during the second week of OTAs, or that we learned of as media the second week of OTAs. It could have happened those last couple of days of the first week. But if he's back and healthy, he's on the PUP list right now. But remember, we saw Michael Thomas go on the PUP or physically unable to perform list on the 21st of July last year, and 27th of July when training camp opened, he was on the field, not just standing there. He was running routes going full go. And by the way, we expect him to be out there full go again, Michael Thomas, at the first day of training camp. And that's awesome. But when it comes to Nick Saldiveri, if he's out there and if he's ready to go early in training camp and he's able to prove and all these other things, what it is that he's going to be able to do, I don't think that there's a reason why if Andrus Peat suffers an injury and Nick Saldiveri has balled out over the course of camp, whether it's at right guard or left guard, remember during rookie minis and stuff like that, he spent some time at right guard as well, that you keep him off the field. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't care how much, Andrus Peat has contributed and things like that. If he can't stay healthy or if he's underperforming, you have to listen to that. But you also have to listen if he's performing and if he's showing up. Because look, this is a big year for Andrus Peat because he's going to be a free agent at the end of the season, effectively no matter what, right? I mean, I guess there's a chance that he comes back to New Orleans. I just don't see that happening. You took a pay cut. You basically accelerated the end of your contract to the end of this season. It seems very unlikely that Andrus Peat's going to be here in New Orleans in 2024. But if he balls out in 2023, it gives him a better opportunity to hit the market. And you're seeing what's happening in the guard market right now. Guys like Zach Martin, who signed these 6-year contracts, are all of a sudden fresh out of the market now, making $7 million below the highest paid folks, even though he was one of the highest paid folks for a long time. And that's one of the reasons why now he's, saying, I might not show up to training camp, which, by the way, if Nick Martin hits the market, yeah, you call him. But if he's asking for $20 million a year, you're not giving it to him here in New Orleans. That's for sure. Not at 32 years old. You're just going to end up back in a similar situation as the Andrus Peat one, to where you overpaid to keep him here in New Orleans because he was the best guard on the market. And so you didn't really overpay, right? You paid the market price to keep Andrus Peat here in New Orleans. And it's been what it's been, right? Like, let's just be real. But if he goes out there and he performs extremely well throughout camp, Andrus Peat does, or he goes out there and he performs extremely well throughout the 2003 season, you listen to that just like you listen to if he's underperforming. You have to go, it's got to go both ways, right? So I think that the Saints are in a great position to push for competition on the interior. Nick Saldiveri, get Calvin Throckmorton involved, Andrus Peat, James Hurst, all that. And just so that's the big one that I think we need to all be watching over the course of training camp, and then potentially into the season and even beyond. The other thing that I'll be watching on the offensive line is Trevor Penning the guy at left tackle, or do the Saints end up having to go back to James Hurst? We're going to do our film study on subtext next week before training camp starts about every single snap that Trevor Penning took on that one game that he started last year against the Carolina Panthers in Week 18. The play on the offense during that game was abysmal. It was potato salad out in the sun. Like, it was not good. It was coleslaw left out in the sun. Like, not good at all. But Trevor Penning performed pretty well. So we'll get a look at that. And so if the Saints really like him still, and they, and he's healthy, they clearly really still like him. But if he's healthy and he's able to go out there, then great, he's your starting left tackle. But if he's not able to be healthy, and if he is missing some time during camp, then how does James Hurst potentially play into maybe a little bit of a mix-up over at left tackle as well? So that's the other one that I'm watching, but that's a little bit less. That's like a what if more than a let's watch this training camp battle. I think the real battle, and the one that you're really going to be watching, is at guard. And I think the more competition you have on the offensive line, the better off you are, because staying healthy is already a challenge for them, but also producing, right? Producing is still something that offensive line needs to be able to do more consistently. And I think that as you continue to build competition there, the better off you're going to be putting yourself in that position, and this, that, and the third over the course of training camp and going into the 2023 season. All right, family, coming up in tomorrow's episode, it's In Case You Missed It, getting you caught up with all of the big stories from around the New Orleans Saints in what has been a busy week for the club. And of course, getting you caught up with any new news that should happen between now and then. We got that all coming up for you in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. For more additional content like exclusive film studies, Q&As, and more, head over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today. Start your 14-day free trial, $4.99 after that. Going to be a lot of fun throughout training camp. And then I'll probably stop pitching this so much, but it is something I'm excited to be doing and excited to be able to create some additional content. And it's helpful to have that additional support for the show as well. I know a lot of folks have asked, how can we support the show? Here's a way to do it to where you're actually getting something back as well. Joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints if you want to get involved. Appreciate you as always, y'all, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.